I
Yeah,
think hitting that narrative is super important. The whole 1776 narrative, because that is what conservatives care about most. So if you break that one down, I mean, the rest just fall down because a lot of them deeply want to actually they want someone stronger. They want like order, but they're held back by the 76 narrative.
yeah. That's why I made it because everything kind of stems from there.
Yeah,
And once you destroy that, it's like
pretty epic.
what where can anti-monarchists really go from there? Because that's where they start.
Yep.
So,
It kind of was all of us, really, right?
what was all of us?
I mean, I don't know about you, but the 76 narrative was very important for me until like I got into monarchy, but I was always into the like I guess domestic kind of stuff. Like I found monarchy very with the ability to get things done more efficiently, and I'm a big history lover, so I always was more in love with monarchy than democracy. So of course, researching the 76 narrative and debunking it.
I don't remember when I learned the truth about how this country got started. I don't remember when I learned that George had almost nothing to do with it and Parliament wasn't at fault anyway. I don't remember when I learned that, but I think it was after I already became a monarchist. And whether whether it was legitimate or not, whether it was George's fault or not, I didn't really care because I never thought all kings are perfect anyway. And then I just happened to learn later on that George was totally justified. He hardly did anything in the first place, but what he did do, he was justified. So that helps.
Yeah. Well, I think King George plays a significant role in the narrative. I think the most important part of that narrative is the whole idea that we rebelled for a republic and for, technically true, like for the ideas of freedom and liberty and as a good, as this kind of honor and strive to fight for, like the values. I think that's the right word. Our values became from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to critiquing that. I think that's the most important part. And I remember telling my parents, like, the pursuit of happiness literally is a liberal idea. Why are we trying to pursue happiness? And of course, it sounds nice until you realize that that's not really, that just leads to what human nature does, which is it's not really happiness. Like, no one's going to find joy in trying to strive on their own. That's just a classical liberal idea and theory that humans can naturally be able to find that type of joy in themselves and not with like more of a collective group. I'm not, into communist crap, but
Well,
people working together or friendships and striving to not just this kind of super hyper individual mindset. That's kind of the critique, and breaking that was the most important part of the narrative, which I think we all kind of broke down. You were for the first, I believe.
I think everything about the revolution was left wing egalitarian nonsense, all of it. And you guys saw my video that conservatives are left wing. Like, democracy is left wing. Yeah, pursuit of happiness, that's a left wing idea. It's all left wing. It's all like everyone has their own version of a equal, like everyone's equal utopia. Like, what does equal mean? Everyone has their own interpretation of that, but it always comes down to being equal in some way, and it's always some sort of strive for utopia, some perfect world. It's not that America like became left wing. It's been left wing since it was founded. Period.
Yeah, I agree. I think the people after the founding fathers were a lot more conservative, though, and conservative in the sense of like they were more philosophically object, like not really with that. That's why the contents of the Federalist, for example, were not really about like they didn't say liberty and freedom, individuality. A lot of them also said like, you know, we gotta have this um, the sovereignty of America and the United States derives from doing these certain tariffs protections or doing this and A and B, right? They weren't really. Thomas Jefferson was much more the whole philosophy and we freedom and all that. So how I see it, I definitely think the founding fathers were very lost. Maybe they were just so one of those elites out of touch from reality. But a lot of the people afterwards were, I would say, conservative, which is why the country did so well for a very long time. Under the founding fathers, I know it's after war, but economically it was kind of disastrous until the next 30 years. They got out of debt later on under pretty decent leaders in the Federalists. And I guess Thomas Jefferson, but he kind of conceded on a lot of stuff. It wasn't like he made everything egalitarian because a lot of people didn't really need that at the moment. They needed leadership and actual stuff to be going. They didn't need this liberal shit at the moment because things were going to shit.
Well, the way I see it is America was successful from the beginning because we broke off from the most successful empire of all time. And I mean success as far as like its reach. Like, does anything compare to the British
Oh, of
Empire?
course.
I don't think so. Like, the Romans were
Also, our
pretty impressive,
geography.
but uh, they didn't have they didn't reach as far. The only reason they even learned how to sail is because they went to war with Carthage. Whereas like with Britain, it's like they come from an island. Like learning to sail was the first thing they had to learn how to do.
True.
Yeah. I wanted to chime in on the founding fathers and the, I guess, conservatives after them. It Part of it's correct, but a lot of it is, if you look at like a lot of their old writings and letters to each other and around to various people, a lot of them were propagandized by various things. Because a few of them used to be monarchists, and then they'd get various propaganda, which slowly turned them into what they ended up as.
I never got the feeling that really any of them were ever monarchist. Like maybe slightly royalist, but not. I haven't read anything to suggest that they were ever monarchists. Like Hamilton had some of that thinking, but certainly not the others. Maybe I
Well, I
just
know
haven't looked deep enough into it, but it seemed
I
like they
know
were always against. I don't know.
for the most part they were, but let me see if I can find the famous book that's always brought up when that's, I guess, credited for changing a lot of their minds.
I mean, it was kind of normal back then to follow monarchy, to follow kings. A lot of the stuff is newer, so probably what I would suspect is they didn't really know how to form the specific ideas of a republic, so they kind of just stuck with what they knew, which probably was for the better of them because to what we could see today. Yeah, and we have a lot more hindsight. In 1700, you can kind of get away with some of this thinking because it wasn't really new. I know there was republics, but not to the way that America initiated it. Like the founding fathers did something unique, and I think it was wrong, but I also think it was. We have like way more hindsight. They didn't really know too much of what they were doing.
I don't think that's much of an excuse because they
Not excusing them, not excusing them, but that just
like
Well,
you can always put a twist on republicanism.
get the
Just
perspective of the
like,
time.
do we have a president or do we have two consuls? Like, and you tweak it slightly and then you go, well, this has never been done before, so let's go for it. Like, I don't think that's slightly, not even slightly justified. And I also believe like I just said, I've never read anything to suggest that most of the founding fathers were ever monarchists, but it kind of seems like they never were because How do you go from being a monarchist to blaming everything on George when nothing was George's fault, and then you're suddenly not a monarchist, and then you literally establish a republic? Just that's a weird transition to me.
You can thank Thomas Paine's pamphlet called Common Sense that was published.
Oh, Thomas Paine.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
He's
what
the
can
worst.
you know, as Arch was saying that yeah, maybe they weren't monarchists, but a lot of them used to be royalists before that pamphlet came out.
Hmm.
The Yeah, I could see many of them. I think some of the Federalist edged leaders, who was it, John Adams and Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton. I would see them definitely as way more in the royalist faction or way more loyal in the very beginning. But I think also like we have to think about how in 1700 messaging was very difficult, and at where they were at, they probably only thought the situation with the limited info they had. So honestly, if they had all the like info, because maybe like they were given a wrong perspective about what the king, and it changed their viewpoint, but they knew all the info, maybe they would have a different assessment. Because again, in 1700, sending one message could take 8 months. So you get what I mean? They probably didn't like have everything. They definitely didn't have like an internet connection to like see everything. You couldn't just look it up.
Not to mention that it was only at the beginning of the revolution where the distinction was different between Parliament and the King, and by the time the founding fathers got into it, it was already towards the end.
I kind of was talking about this before. But I think you kind of see a trend after the founding fathers, where yes, Thomas Jefferson did get in power, but what we also saw was he had to concede on a lot. Like, the territorial expansion, which the geography really benefited America too. And you kind of see that kind of die out a little bit, especially when things go kind of tough. People have to rely on, strong leaders. And I think, Thomas Jefferson could be the weirdest irony ever, because when you think about it, Thomas Jefferson, the egalitarian was kind of like his own king. He, in a very weird way, because the guy was literally seen as, you know, this ultimate leader. He was this guy leading an entire faction. He was the one of the central points. He was kind of like, who's another movement? It's kind of like with Nick. I don't know. He's just one guy and a lot of huge fan base, and the guy had a lot of energy because he was young. So in the territorial expansion, he implemented a lot of tariffs. The guy was used the government a lot.
I mean, in the same way, you can look at it even in modern day. The leftists scream equality and, freedom and everything, but in reality, there's basically a monarchy in everything but name, with how strict they are with hierarchy.
True. Oh, and also it's funny. Thomas Chin was literally called the Democratic Republican Party. Oh, it's the Democratic Republicans. That interesting blend of both, which later on became the two parties. The, I believe the big divide was mostly Republics. Republicans wanted it more resembling Republic, with like less of the voting rights that were happening, and then the Democratic Party under Andrew Jackson wanted to expand voting rights and you know a democratic basis, and that was kind of the divide. That's why they were unique in those two names and all that throughout the 1840s. I guess just my assessment was that over time you do see more and more voting rights given, and I think it does kind of lead to not really it kind of gets dumber in a way. How I noticed when they unlocked a huge amount of a new voter base, all they did was pander more, and you had a more of a rise of this like populist kind of rhetoric, later on, because you have to appeal to a huge amount of these voter bases that, a lot of them don't really know. They just kind of started voting. The 1840s and 50s, 60s, around that era, you see the new unlocking of voting, voting rights given to, because it used to just be you had to own land and be a white man. And then we see more voting rights given out, and I think it did lead to a conversation of from at least it was a lot more clever. At least a lot of them were a lot more clever in conversation, but then it slowly just got worse and worse because they were just pandered a lot more. That you see a lot rise in like these populist rhetoric, which some populism made sense, but to the most part, at that time, like you just have a lot of these people who are a lot more crude, and at the time, kind of an offensive. And a lot of them joined the Democratic Party later on. So it's just kind of my assessment is when you have kings, when you have great leadership, you kind of have to rely less on this pandering, which may be obvious enough, but I also think it's a lot more intellectual because you rely less on polling bases that they're not like researching. Like I said before, they just started voting. They just kind of started going into it. I don't even know if a lot of them were excited. I would like to see the turnout percentages. I would not be surprised if not that many of them turned out to vote. And I'm talking people who don't own land, but they're white male, or later on, including blacks.
I think once you start, as soon as you introduce voting at all, as soon as you bring voting into the system at all, and I mean voting to elect leaders, just representative democracy of any kind, no matter what rules you put on it, it will always break down. Always. When votes are how you get power, you'll do whatever the fuck it takes to get more votes. Especially while you're in power, you find a way to get more votes the next election cycle. Maybe bring more illegals in, or make them legal, technically legal, just whatever the fuck. It always breaks down. That's why I'm so unapologetic about believing in absolute monarchy. No matter what the fuck you do, like it all comes down to people want power, and you have to suffocate all that energy. You have to suck it all out of the system of no one's getting power. No one else is getting power. It's not happening, period. That's why I don't even believe in like voting for a king, even if he is absolute, even if he is king for life. I still don't believe in voting him in.
All it takes is one crack.
Yeah. So absolute power and birthright. That's how you eliminate power struggles. You have to eliminate power struggles, or else it'll break down over time. Every time.